first feature of the world is that every country you arrive at, there's a man with a hat and a badge and a gun who checks your papers. So the first most obvious feature of the world is not that it's flat, not that it's global, not that it's unrestricted, but that it is enormously restricted in terms of the movement of people.
The US policy has become a mousetrap because if you go in, it's very costly to go back out.
If there's one thing that people understand about US immigration policy at the moment is that it doesn't work.
Migration and remittances represent a huge potential development tool. If we think of people as individuals, obviously migration implies the possibility of enormous increases in income per capita, increases that at the personal level could not be achieved through a sustained period of growth of many, many, many years. So it allows for potential increases at the personal level, and it allows for potential development impacts at the aggregate level in the sending countries. And still, migration has not been considered as one of the policy tools of development. And policies around migration are not on the forefront of discussions on policies that might help promote development.
Households that receive exogenous increases in remittances are more likely to send their children to school, reduce child labor. They're more likely to invest in new household enterprises, as well as in a broad sense, exit poverty status. In addition to direct impacts on well-being measures like this, there's also substantial evidence that remittances serve as insurance. Remittances rise when economic conditions get worse in the receiving countries, and they fall as economic conditions improve.
The poor make different amounts from month to month. And as a result, for example, if you're a rural farmer, you'll have some months in which there's a lot of income flow and many months in which there's not much income flow at all. This generates a massive smoothing demand, which savings can fill.
The question in my mind is, if the US admits selectively more engineers, nurses, and scientists, many of them from developing countries, what happens to the number of engineers, nurses, and scientists in developing countries? It's not at all clear that the departure of a skilled person from a developing country equals the loss of 1.00 person from a developing country. Skilled emigration can tend to create skills, and it's something that should be pondered, I think, by people seeking to limit the movement of skilled workers in the name of development.
People move when they are desperate because they can't live there anymore and see their people die or their families die or themselves die. They move because they're pushed out somehow. There are no opportunities. And in that process, somebody out there is there to employ them. That's why they move, which means migration must be a win-win for all sides.
Immigrants have provided us so many resources, and these are resources which we increasingly need today, including workers, both at the high end and at the lower end. We all are in this to make each group of immigrants that come into the United States to bring them up to speed, to become as productive as citizens as possible.
Immigration is a development tool, but if we start with development as people, not place, then the answer to the question, is migration good for development, is just completely trivial. Of course it's good for human well-being, because by being a voluntary choice of human beings, people do it when they're made better off.
But one of the greatest fears about immigration is that if we open up the doors, there will be a flood. We're going to open up floodgates, and all these people will come in.
I think there's fundamentally, some conflicts of interest between what would be good for U.S. on development policy and what's good for the developing world. And what I think we should be trying to do is think about, are there ways to try and find areas where that conflict of interest is not stark?
I would emphasize the importance, a constructive role, both for rich countries like the U.S. and the poor countries, of the back and forth, not the stock. Leave aside what we usually think of, which is the Statue of Liberty. You're going to become a U.S. citizen. This is permanent. We're focusing. That's important, but we're focusing too much on that. I would make it easier to send remittances. I'd make it easier for workers to come and go back and forth, to have legitimate temporary visas where they can work here legitimately, and it's stabilizing.
People were not necessarily thinking of migrating for life. They were thinking of migrating as part of a life cycle, a period in which they might go, sacrifice something in terms of social connections, family connections, and do some savings, and then go back and live with the people that they love and the people that they know in a culture where they understand all the jokes.
So what are the lessons that we've learned then from the history of the Bracero program, from the temporary workers we now have, and from the illegal immigration we now have? Well, one is that the economy is reliant, it's structurally reliant on imported workers, both at the skilled and the unskilled worker. It's structural now. It's not something that's by choice. This isn't a war of choice. In '86, the whole argument that, if we were sitting in this room back in '86, everybody would have been coming up speaker after speaker talking about how we're going to wean employers off of temporary workers. You can't wean employers off of the temporary. It's impossible.
So the question is, what's so wrong with permanent immigration? I mean, we are a country that is demographically aging. We need younger workers. In order to be competitive, it's important to have growth. Why are we so fixated on only having temporary programs and guest workers? What is the matter with permanent immigration as one of the answers and solutions to the issue of immigration reform and labor market needs?
I think there are two main attractions of temporary migration. One of them is sort of a fake, and that's the political attraction. Because I think a lot of the reason that governments support the idea of temporary migration is because they believe their publics will not accept greater permanent migration. So it may be, a sort of compromise, a political compromise. And I think that's particularly true in a lot of European countries, perhaps more true than it is here. But the other attraction of it is, as Edward said, not everyone wants to stay. And mobility is a reality. People do live their lives in more than one place at a time. So I think the thing about a temporary program is that it should facilitate mobility rather than a lot of the circular programs get sort of fixated on how you enforce return. And in my view, that's not the right question. The right question is how you facilitate mobility, how you facilitate circularity.
People are going to come, they're going to work, and they want to go back. But the fact is that our system doesn't even allow for that. That's what we need to fix. In this economy, this is not a time to be advocating for massive expansion of worker visa programs. On the other hand, it is the time to be advocating for the establishment and formulation of worker visa programs that serve the needs of our economy. So we have to be very, very savvy and clear about how we see the value of immigrants and immigration to the nation moving forward.
Migration can be enriched even in terms of the domestic political debate, in the moral justification for the domestic political debate, with a certain international development perspective.
There is no one clear, clean answer. Everything is messy, and it's everything's a trade-off. Better to get your hands dirty, get involved in the trade-off. Better for all concerned than to shut the door and say we don't have anything to do with it.